We didn't want you here. Those were the first words my mother whispered as I stepped into the banquet hall I had paid $4,500 to rent for the Johnson family reunion. The room was empty, the tables already stripped of their centerpieces, the chairs shoved to the side like debris after a storm. I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the receipt I had saved from weeks of sacrifice, and realized in a single, crushing instant that the party had already happened without me. My chest tightened, my pulse roared in my ears, and my mother's satisfied smirk told me this was no mistake, it was a choice. I had spent months planning this reunion, telling myself it would be the moment our fractured family remembered that I belonged. I arranged the catering, the music, even special accommodations for my father's diet and my brother's wine allergy. I covered every detail down to the floral arrangements, convincing myself that money could buy respect, that generosity could earn love. Yet now, surrounded by wilted petals and half-empty wine bottles left behind, I understood the cruel truth they had celebrated together, laughed together, toasted together, and all the while, they knew I was never going to be allowed through the door. My mother's perfume clung to the air, the same bottle I had given her last Christmas when she had never thanked me for. Her voice, calm and almost sweet, delivered the words that shattered me more than years of quiet dismissals ever had. We didn't want you here. It was not shame or embarrassment in her tone. It was triumph, as though excluding me from my own gift was the final lesson she wanted me to learn. I staggered further inside the soles of my shoes, crunching on broken glass from a discarded bottle. The air still smelled of roasted meat and cinnamon pie, scents of a feast I was never offered. My mind raced back to the overtime shifts I had taken, the dinners I had skipped, the savings I had drained so that my family could sit under chandeliers and feel important. My sacrifice had bought them joy, but it had purchased me nothing more than humiliation. In that moment, I saw it all clearly. I was not their daughter. I was their bank account, their safety net, their disposable servant. They had made their choice long before tonight, and now, with the echo of my mother's whisper still slicing through me, I felt the last threads of denial snap. This was no accident, no misunderstanding. This was betrayal sharpened into a weapon and aimed straight at me. And as I stood in the wreckage of a celebration I had funded but was forbidden to attend, I realized something even more terrifying. If they could erase me from this reunion so easily, what else had they stolen from me without my knowledge? I was 30 years old, but in that instant, standing in the hollow shell of a celebration I had bankrolled and been denied, I was dragged backward into the story of my life. The truth was that my mother's whisper, "We didn't want you here," wasn't born that night. It was the natural conclusion of 3 decades of reminders that I had never been enough for my family. Not as a daughter, not as a woman, not as a person. From the moment I was old enough to notice, I saw the difference. My brother Brian was 4 years older, and from the day he was born, he was the sun around which our household revolved. He received the new clothes, the better toys, the best schools. I was told, "You can wear Brian's hand-me-downs. There's no sense wasting money on things you'll outgrow." At Christmas, he got the brand new bike he had circled in the Sears catalog, while I got a sweater 2 sizes too large with the tags still from the discount bin. The message was clear: his dreams deserved investment, mine did not. It wasn't only about gifts. It was about attention, about validation. When Brian came home with a B on his report card, my parents clapped him on the shoulder and said, "At least you're trying." When I came home with straight A's, my mother's response was, "Good, that's what girls are supposed to do." The word "supposed" burned. It meant I was fulfilling a duty, not achieving something worth celebrating. No matter how much I excelled, it was invisible. By high school, the favoritism hardened into something crueler. Brian was given a used car on his 16th birthday, a faded red sedan that still ran well enough to take him to parties and dates. I 2 years later was told flatly, "We don't have money for luxuries like cars." That same summer, my father needed his roof repaired, and somehow it was my summer job earnings that disappeared into the contractor's hands. Brian, meanwhile, was at the lake with friends drinking beer bought with cash my mother quietly slipped him. I was home painting walls and babysitting cousins because Amanda is responsible. The pattern only deepened when I went to college. I worked part-time in the library, taking double shifts at the coffee shop during exam weeks to pay tuition. Brian dropped out of his business program after 1 year, and my parents cushioned the blow with excuses. College isn't for everyone, my father said he'll find his way. They bought him a used pickup truck to start a landscaping business that collapsed within 6 months. When the bank threatened repossession, I was the one who bailed him out, taking money meant for my textbooks. "You're so good with numbers," my mother told me when I confronted her. "You'll make it back. Your brother just needs a chance." I never received thanks. Not once. Each sacrifice was swallowed like it had never happened, and worse, it created a new expectation. If Amanda helped once, Amanda could help again. When my mother's medical bills arrived, I was the one who put them on my credit card. When my father's truck broke down, I emptied my savings to cover the mechanic. At Christmas, I bought gifts for everyone: perfume for my mother, a watch for my father, tools for Brian, only to unwrap a pair of socks myself. "We thought practical would be best for you," Aunt Carol had said with a smirk. It was not just neglect, it was derision. They mocked me for being single, for working too hard, for never being fun like Brian. At one Thanksgiving, when I tried to tell the family I had been promoted to senior accountant, my father cut me off mid-sentence and raised a toast to Brian for his courage to keep trying new things. Everyone clapped. I sat there invisible, my achievement swallowed in the noise. Despite it all, I kept hoping. Hope is a cruel thing. It convinces you that if you just give a little more sacrifice, a little more, maybe this time will be different. That was why, when the idea of the family reunion came up, I volunteered immediately. "Let me handle it," I said, my voice eager, desperate for approval. I told myself this would be the moment they finally saw me, the dutiful daughter who held them together. I booked the hall, negotiated with the caterer, paid deposits out of my dwindling savings. I thought of every detail: vegetarian dishes for Aunt Carol, gluten-free rolls for my father, a wine list that wouldn't trigger Brian's allergies. I planned it with the precision of someone who knew her worth was always measured against perfection. Each receipt I filed away, each invoice I cleared, felt like a step toward redemption. When I hit submit on the final payment, I actually smiled, believing I had purchased belonging. Yet the signs were there. My mother's voice on the phone distracted, almost irritated whenever I brought up the reunion. Yes, Amanda. I'm sure it'll be fine." My father's silence. Brian's snide comment. "Don't go overboard. It's just family, not a business meeting." I ignored them all, clinging to my fantasy. I pictured laughter, a photo of us all together under the chandelier, a moment when I could finally say I did this for us, and hear anyone say thank you. Instead, I walked into ruins. The flowers were wilted because they had bloomed the night before. The wine bottles were half empty because the glasses had already been raised without me. My mother's whisper was only the final confirmation of what years had already taught me. My sacrifices were not invisible, they were intentional. They knew. They had always known. And they had chosen to take from me anyway. It was more than favoritism. It was contempt. Every action I had taken to prove my worth had only cemented my role as servant, as provider, as disposable. They did not forget to invite me. They erased me on purpose because erasing me made their celebration cleaner. They could laugh without guilt toast, without eyes that reminded them of their debts. Standing there in the abandoned hall, I felt the timeline of my life collapse into one moment. The sweater 2 sizes too large, the missing car, the stolen summer wages, the unpaid medical bills, the watch on my father's wrist, the perfume on my mother's neck, the truck my brother crashed. And now this, a reunion they had let me fund but forbade me to join. It wasn't an oversight. It was the culmination, the proof that no matter how much I gave, they would never see me as family, only as a resource. My mother's words echoed again, harsher each time I replayed them. "We didn't want you here. Not just here tonight. Not here at all. Not in the family picture. Not in the inheritance. Not in the narrative they wrote, where Brian was the chosen one and I was the background character, good for paying bills and disappearing quietly." And yet, even as despair crushed me, a spark lit beneath it. For the first time, I saw the truth without distortion. They had taken everything because I had let them. They had consumed me because I had offered myself. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted to reclaim even a fraction of the life they had stolen, I had to stop being their wallet and start being my own advocate. I walked out of the banquet hall with the receipt still crumpled in my hand. But this time, instead of a reminder of shame, it felt like evidence. Evidence of fraud, of exploitation, of betrayal. Evidence that could be used. The past had defined me as their victim. The future, I realized, could define me as something else entirely. The drive home from the banquet hall was a blur. Streetlights streaked past like taunts, every red glow bouncing off the receipt still clutched in my trembling hand. I parked outside my small apartment, sat in the dark car for nearly an hour, and stared at nothing. My mother's whisper repeated in my head in a loop, "We didn't want you here." A mantra of rejection that gnawed at me until the pain turned into something sharper. By the time dawn cracked the horizon, humiliation had hardened into fury. I told myself I couldn't confront them, not again, not after 30 years of silence. But that Sunday afternoon, against every instinct for self-preservation, I drove to my parents' house. The same brick house I had helped refinance when my father nearly lost it. The same house where my childhood bedroom had been emptied to store Brian's broken exercise equipment. I rang the bell, pulse hammering, and when the door opened, there was no warm welcome. Only my mother's startled expression shifting quickly into irritation. "Amanda," she said flatly, as though my presence was an inconvenience. "What are you doing here?" I stepped inside without waiting for permission. My father sat in his recliner television, humming with a football game, not even turning his head. Brian leaned against the kitchen counter, smirking with a bottle of beer in his hand. Aunt Carol was perched on the sofa, flipping through a magazine, her eyes flicking up just to watch the drama unfold. The air was thick with hostility before I even opened my mouth. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice shaking but loud enough to cut through the room. "Why did you let me pay for the reunion if you were never going to let me attend?" Brian chuckled, first low and mocking. "Because you're good at paying bills, Mandy. That's your specialty." He took a swig of beer, eyes glittering with amusement. "No one actually wants you around. You just make everyone uncomfortable with all your little lectures about responsibility." The words struck like a whip, but I refused to flinch. I turned to my mother, desperate for something, anything that would explain. "I worked overtime. I drained my savings. I thought this was about bringing us together." Her face didn't soften. Instead, she folded her arms. "No one forced you, Amanda. You always act like a martyr. If you want to waste your money, that's your choice. But don't come here looking for sympathy. You've always been too dramatic." Too dramatic. That was the phrase she had used when I cried at 14 after being denied a birthday party while Brian hosted his friends. That was the phrase she used when I asked why my summer wages disappeared to pay for my father's tools. It was the phrase that minimized every hurt until I doubted whether I had the right to feel it. But now, standing in the living room of the house my sacrifices had saved, something snapped. "You didn't want me there because I'm not Brian," I said, my voice rising. "Because I've never been good enough for you, no matter how much I give, no matter how much I bleed. You wanted your golden boy to shine without my shadow reminding you of your debts." Aunt Carol clicked her tongue, smirking. "Oh, please, Amanda, don't embarrass yourself. Brian's the son, the heir. That's just how families work. You should be proud to support him." Support him! The words tasted like poison. Proud to erase myself so he could thrive. Proud to sacrifice while being mocked. Proud to be invisible. My hands shook, but instead of tears, rage poured out. "I'm not proud," I said coldly. "I'm done." That was when my father finally looked up from the television, his brow furrowed, his voice calm but sharp. "Don't disrespect this family, Amanda. We've given you everything." "Everything." I laughed a bitter sound that startled even me. "You gave Brian everything. You gave me nothing but bills to pay and insults to swallow. You didn't even give me a seat at the table for the reunion I funded." Brian slammed his beer bottle on the counter glass, clinking. "You think you're better than us because you work some boring job with numbers. You think money makes you important. Newsflash, Amanda, you'll never matter, not to us." For years, I would have retreated at that, swallowed my anger, and retreated into silence. But not this time. I stepped closer, meeting his sneer with steel. "Maybe not to you, but your words don't define me anymore." The room stiffened. My mother's lips tightened, my father's eyes narrowed, Aunt Carol's smirk faltered. They weren't used to me speaking like this. They weren't used to me pushing back. And in their discomfort, I felt the first flicker of power. I kept hoping I continued voice steady now that if I just did enough, gave enough, you'd finally see me. But all I did was teach you how to use me. That ends today. I won't pay another bill. I won't clean up another mess. You will never treat me like this again. Linda's voice rose sharp with venom. If you walk away from this family, don't bother coming back. I met her glare, my heart thundering, but my voice came out calm. You already made sure I wasn't part of this family. I'm just finally catching up. I turned and walked toward the door, each step heavier but freer. Behind me, voices rose, Brian shouting, Aunt Carol muttering, my father calling my name. But I didn't stop. My hand closed around the knob, and for the first time in my life, I chose myself over them. As the door slammed shut behind me, I knew the confrontation was only the beginning. They would call me selfish. They would try to guilt me back into line. But something inside me had shifted. The humiliation at the banquet hall had stripped away every illusion, and what remained was raw clarity. I wasn't their servant. I wasn't their safety net. And if they had stolen from me once, they could do it again. But now I had something I had never possessed before, the will to fight back. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the receipts, emails, and credit card statements I had saved, a plan began to take shape. For 30 years, I had been silent. For 30 years, they had taken. But the evidence was in my hands, and the law was on my side. They thought excluding me from a reunion would break me. Instead, it became the spark that lit a fire they could never control. I spread the receipts out across my kitchen table like a general preparing for war. The evidence was everywhere, tucked into the corners of my life. Proof of every time I had been used and dismissed. But the truth was, these were more than memories of sacrifice. They were legal documents, financial trails, undeniable markers of exploitation. For the first time, I saw them not as symbols of shame, but as weapons. The next morning, I called Rachel Miller. We had met in college when I was a nervous sophomore working double shifts, and she was a law student already brimming with fire. We had lost touch for a while, but when her voice answered the phone strong and familiar, I nearly broke into tears. Rachel, I whispered, I need help. I think my family has been stealing from me. Within hours, she was at my apartment. I showed her everything, the reunion receipt, the credit card statements, the bills I had paid under pressure. She combed through each paper, her brows furrowing deeper with every line. Amanda, she finally said, tapping a statement with her pen. This isn't just neglect. This is fraud. Look here, this credit account was opened in your name, but the signature isn't yours. My heart hammered. I leaned closer, staring at the scrawl, pretending to be me. That's not mine, I said firmly. Rachel nodded. Your brother's handwriting, am I right? It was. I would recognize Brian's lazy loops anywhere. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. They hadn't just used me. They had stolen from me outright, pretending to be me, chaining my name to debts I never agreed to. Rachel's eyes sharpened. This is identity theft. With the amount of money on these accounts, this is a felony. If we file charges, there will be an investigation and they won't be able to hide. I sat back trembling. For so long, I had dreamed of justice, but never believed it could exist for me. If I do this, I asked quietly, what happens to them? Rachel's jaw tightened. What happens to them is what they earned. What matters is what happens to you. You get your freedom back. You stop being their victim. We worked late into the night, cataloging everything. Rachel helped me draft statements, organized the receipts, chronologically highlighted the false signatures. For every insult I had endured, there was now a page of evidence to counter it. For every dismissal, a number that proved the cost. The next day, Rachel accompanied me to the police station. Filing the report felt surreal. The officer took my statement, scanned the documents, and assured me an investigation would begin. I left the building lighter than I had felt in years, though the knot of fear in my chest remained. What would my family do when they found out? I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a call from my father. I let it go to voicemail. His voice, gruff and furious, spilled out when I finally listened. What the hell do you think you're doing, Amanda? Calling the police on your own family. You're destroying us. You're tearing this family apart. I almost laughed at the irony. They had excluded me from their reunion, stolen my identity, drained my money, and yet I was the one destroying the family. That was when the realization hit me like a thunderclap. They had always counted on my silence. My obedience was the glue holding their lies together, and now, for the first time, I had ripped it away. That weekend, Rachel invited me to her office to meet with a financial investigator she trusted. His name was Mark, a calm man with sharp eyes who specialized in uncovering hidden assets. He reviewed my case and asked a simple question. Have you ever wondered why your parents told you there was no inheritance from your grandfather? I frowned. They said everything went to medical bills. There was nothing left. Mark exchanged a look with Rachel, then slid a folder across the table. Inside was a copy of my grandfather's will obtained from county records. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words half of his estate, a substantial sum had been designated for me. My parents had been the executors. They had hidden it, funneled the funds elsewhere, leaving me to believe there had been nothing. I felt the room tilt. Betrayal layered on betrayal. Not only had they stolen my present, they had stolen my past, rewriting my grandfather's final wishes to erase me. My hands shook as I clutched the paper. They lied to me, I whispered. They lied about everything. Rachel's voice was steady. This isn't just theft, Amanda. This is a violation of probate law. If we bring this to court, we can expose them. We can recover what you were owed. The weeks that followed were a blur of depositions and filings. My family erupted their anger, flooding through voicemails, texts, even letters shoved under my apartment door. How dare you drag us through the mud? Aunt Carol hissed in one voicemail. You're selfish. You'll regret this. My father tried the guilt angle. Think of how this looks. Families don't take each other to court. My mother's messages dripped venom. Brian is heartbroken. Do you really want to ruin your brother's life over money? But it wasn't just money. It was years. It was dignity. It was my identity, my inheritance, my worth. For every attempt to shame me back into silence, Rachel reminded me, they built their comfort on your suffering. You are reclaiming what was stolen. When the court date arrived, I sat at the plaintiff's table with Rachel at my side, my pulse thundering as my family entered the courtroom. My mother's glare could have cut glass. My father looked grim, my brother arrogant, Aunt Carol whispering furiously in the back row. For the first time, though, I wasn't shrinking under their gaze. I was meeting it head-on, armed with truth. Rachel laid out the evidence with surgical precision. The fraudulent credit accounts, the forged signatures, the bank transfers that linked directly to Brian's purchases. Then came the bombshell, the will. The judge's eyebrows rose as Rachel presented the document, highlighting my grandfather's clear intent, that half his estate go to me. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as the betrayal unfolded in black and white. My mother tried to speak, her voice shrill with denial. She's twisting things. Amanda has always been ungrateful. The judge silenced her with a gavel. Mrs. Johnson, the documents are clear. This is a serious breach of fiduciary duty. Brian's arrogance crumbled into panic as the investigator testified, tracing purchases back to him: vacations, a car, jewelry. My father's shoulders sagged as though decades of denial were finally crashing down. Aunt Carol sat pale and silent, her smirk gone. And me, I sat straighter with every revelation, the years of invisibility burning away. Each fact laid bare was a vindication. Every lie exposed was a wound finally cauterized. When the ruling came, it was more than I had dared to hope. Restitution for the stolen funds, recognition of my rightful inheritance, penalties imposed for the fraud. My family, once so smug in their power, reduced to faces twisted with outrage and shame. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. Rachel shielded me as microphones thrust forward, but one question broke through the noise. How does it feel to take your family to court? I paused the cameras, flashing the autumn air sharp against my skin. Then I answered with the truth. It feels like freedom. That night, I returned to my apartment exhausted but lighter. Michael, my colleague who had witnessed so much of my struggle, brought takeout and a bottle of wine. We ate on the floor, laughing for the first time in weeks, the weight of years finally beginning to lift. Later, alone in bed, I stared at the ceiling and let myself feel the enormity of what had happened. My family had betrayed me in ways I could never forget. They had stolen, lied, mocked, and erased, but I had fought back, and I had won. They wanted me gone, and in a way, they got their wish. I was gone from their control, their lies, their grip. What they hadn't realized was that in pushing me out, they freed me to become something more than their scapegoat. The reunion they had denied me had become the spark for my liberation. Their cruelty had forged my resolve. Their theft had taught me my worth. And as I drifted into sleep, I whispered to myself the truth they had tried to bury. I was never the problem. I was the survivor. The judgment against my family was more than a legal decision. It was a line drawn in history, an official acknowledgement that what they had done was wrong. For so long, I had carried my pain in silence, convincing myself I was dramatic, that I was unworthy, that maybe I had exaggerated. But now there was a ruling stamped and signed that said otherwise. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I was right. Word spread quickly in our community. My parents had always carried themselves with an air of superiority, pillars of respectability who reminded everyone of their sacrifices. Now, whispers followed them in the grocery store aisles at church in the neighborhood where they had once boasted about Brian's potential. People looked at them not with admiration, but with suspicion. Did you hear what they did to Amanda became the question no amount of denial could erase. Brian, stripped of his easy arrogance, was left drowning in debt. The fraudulent accounts were closed, but restitution meant he was now responsible for paying back what he had stolen. His car, his toys, his flashy lifestyle gone. For the first time in his life, there were no handouts, no safety nets. He called me once, his voice hollow, begging me to withdraw the charges. I hung up. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. My mother Linda shrank under the weight of disgrace. The woman who had once whispered venom in my ear now avoided my gaze entirely when we crossed paths in the courthouse hallways. She tried to spin the story to relatives, claiming I had been manipulated, that Rachel had filled my head with lies, but the documents told the truth too loudly. Even Aunt Carol, who had always sneered at me, stopped returning Linda's calls when it became clear the lies were indefensible. My father Robert carried his shame differently. He didn't scream or deny. He simply looked tired, hollowed out, as if the years of silence he had used to protect Brian had finally turned to stone inside his chest. He had watched my mother and brother exploit me, and he had done nothing. That was his legacy. And me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by what I had given away. I moved into a new apartment across town, small but bright, filled with things that belonged only to me. No one's bills were stacked on the counter. No one's demands filled the answering machine. Michael helped me assemble furniture. Rachel dropped by with wine, and slowly I realized what it meant to build a life not around family obligation, but around choice. The inheritance I recovered wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to secure my freedom, enough to pay off my debts, to enroll in the master's program I had postponed for years to breathe without calculating how much oxygen cost. It was more than money. It was validation from a grandfather who had seen me, who had loved me enough to carve my name into his will, despite a family determined to erase it. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the city lights, I thought about the reunion. I thought about the tables filled with laughter, the toasts made in my absence, the whispered lies that had defined me for so long. And I realized something: that empty hall had been the greatest gift they had ever given me. By excluding me, they had revealed the truth so clearly that I could no longer deny it. They had forced me to choose, and I chose myself. I didn't return their calls. I didn't attend holidays. I didn't send gifts or cards. For once, I let the silence sit with them instead of me. Let them feel the weight of absence, the cold echo of what it meant to lose a daughter not to death but to their own cruelty. Months later, I saw them at a distance in the grocery store. My mother's shoulders were hunched, my father's hair thinner, Brian absent altogether. They looked older, smaller, diminished. I didn't approach. I didn't need to. They had lost the power to define me. They were strangers wearing the faces of people I had once loved. As for me, I was free. Free from the ledger of debts that had always been written in my name. Free from the whispered insults, the favoritism, the weight of being invisible. Free to write my own story without begging for approval that would never come. Sometimes late at night, I still heard my mother's whisper echoing in my mind. "We didn't want you here. But instead of wounding me, it reminded me they didn't want me there because they never deserved me there. They had cast me out, and in doing so, they had liberated me. I leaned into that truth, letting it settle in my bones, stronger than any insult, louder than any dismissal. They had lost a daughter. I had gained a life.